On today's World Insight, in the aftermath of the Trump-Kim summit, we look at the unique players who made the meeting possible. We also uncover what concrete steps will follow the ceremony in Singapore. And with the signing of the joint statement, we analyze the deal and find out who goes home a winner.
Sitting with the impressive skyline of Singapore in the background, welcome to World Insight special on DPRK-US Summit, which concluded on Tuesday here in Singapore. I'm Tian Wei. We are here to bring you more in-depth analysis of what happened on the summit and what might be its implications for days, weeks, and possibly years to come.
A year ago, the U.S. threatened a preemptive military strike against Kim Jong-un's nation. Now, they sit side by side, a burgeoning relationship.
Would you like to say something to the press?
In many ways, it was a chance for DPRK leader Kim Jong-un to say something to the world.
Today we had a historic meeting and decided to leave the past behind.
U.S. President Donald Trump relished his time in the spotlight, and he is embracing the chance to move relations forward in a positive way with the longtime U.S. enemy. Trump and Kim agreeing to what they are billing as a joint statement.
It was not easy getting here.
Not easy is an understatement. But Kim mothballed his nuclear weapons program as well as the missile system capable of carrying warheads. At a news conference later, before a fraction of the 3,000 journalists covering the summit, a beaming Trump said he got what he came for.
Chairman Kim and I just signed a joint statement in which he reaffirmed his unwavering commitment to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We also agreed to vigorous negotiations to implement the agreement as soon as possible.
But the U.S. press corps, often Trump's harshest critic, asked time and again at the news conference, did Kim Jong-un agree?
Only a person that dislikes Donald Trump would say that I've agreed to make a big commitment. It takes a long time. Scientifically, you have to wait certain periods of time and a lot of things happen. But despite that, once you start the process, it means it's pretty much over.
Donald Trump says the U.S. is ending joint military operations in the region with the Republic of Korea, now that, in his words, Kim is promising denuclearization of the DPRK. Trump countered accusations he gave up too much to Kim Jong-un, adamant that punishing economic sanctions will stay in place until Pyongyang is well down the road to denuclearization. The U.S. president says he is reaching out to leaders in the region, including South Korean President Moon Jae-in and China's President Xi Jinping. He will also be seeking help from China and the Republic of Korea to hold Kim Jong-un accountable.
For more on the DPRK-US Summit, concluded on Tuesday in Singapore, we've now joined by Lin Tian-Wei, who is a Jackson Research Fellow at the National University of Singapore, while at the same time Eugene Tan, Associate Professor at the Singapore Management University. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Thank you.
It's our fourth day here in Singapore, or shall I say fourth evening already in Singapore. So the dust has settled down. Now it is the time for the real work. After some relaxation, gentlemen, I just really wonder, what do you think is the biggest takeaway from the summit? Mr. Lim.
The biggest takeaway is that the two countries have met. This opens the way for officials at all levels to have future meetings. And from the press conference, we know who that official is. The leader of the next delegation will be Mike Pompeo. This is the greatest takeaway because we know that there will be a team going to Pyongyang and that they will continue the work from the summit, and the summit is not the be-all and end-all of this denuclearization process.
Right. Well, the delegation's going home. The domestic politics begins, Mr. Tan. So how would that be? I mean, John Bolton working with Mike Pompeo to make things happen. We're going to see a lot of inside fighting.
I think, you know, that'll be the nature of American domestic politics. But I think what you have here is President Trump, you know, who is very determined for whatever reasons, to make, this whole rapprochement with North Korea succeed. And I think with that drive, that's important, right? So the approach then is very different, right? It's a top-down approach. I mean, previous engagement with North Korea has been bottom-up, using lower-level officials, and hopefully this approach, will result in a very different outcome from what we've seen in the past.
There's an interesting discussion, Mr. Lim, about how leadership style, in a way, has been shaping the whole event, has also been shaping the document itself. Well, we are not talking about a leadership style for the individual's sake, but rather this approach. Will this set an example about how future things, future challenges are likely to be handled? Start from the very top and go all the way down.
I think this style is very much specific to President Donald Trump's transactional diplomacy. He comes from a very unconventional kind of background, businessman, very pragmatic, and also constantly changing according to scenarios and situation. Unless you can find someone who is similar from the private sector put into a position of power like that, it might be very difficult to replicate this so-called style of leadership. Having said that, Mr. Kim also has some form of special kind of a leadership style. We saw how he quickly consolidated his power within a space of 3 years, and you can see Mr. Trump has even praised him, saying that it is very difficult for someone who came to power at the age of 26 to be able to consolidate power so quickly, and considers him to be quite talented in that aspect. So you can see that there are different characters at play here. Most of the media describe them as larger than life. So unless we have former reality TV stars like President Trump with a business background, transactional diplomacy, or Mr. Kim that has a young man who has a very good hand in sort of consolidating his power, it's quite difficult to replicate this kind of situation.
You see President Trump, in a way, Mr. Tan, getting quite closer to the earlier so-called enemies, such as DPRK, and getting himself a little bit further away from his used-to-be allies, let's just say Canada, Germany, France, to begin with. How do you see, in a way, this is indicating also about the change of the world that we are witnessing right now, Mr. Tan?
No, we live in a world of disruption, and I think we know, you will compare what happened at the end of the G7 summit, the way President Trump dealt with Prime Minister Trudeau, and him, being totally comfortable in a way with Chairman Kim. One would wonder whether the world has turned upside down. But I think, like what Dr. Lim has mentioned, we're living in a very different world today. The worldviews have changed. President Trump comes from a different background from his predecessors, and Chairman Kim, has to deal with very different realities from his father and grandfather. But I agree with you that leadership is of utmost importance. Right? The ability to seize the opportunity and make that difference. For whatever agendas that they may have. But in the end, if it works out for global peace and security, then I'm all for it.
There's also the debate about leadership style, that is, how much a leader should be informed. If you look at the previous presidents of the United States, ranging from Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and then Barack Obama, some of those are very well informed, very sophisticated if you look at their academic achievements. However, some say the more you know, the less you are likely to make a decision, particularly in a huge state machine. And President Trump, of course, has not necessarily coming from the same style of leadership, not the same style of getting to know the most important issues of the world, but rather he trusts, apparently, his gut feeling. So, Mr. Lim, will that kind of leadership get us somewhere that we have never been to? By the way, will that be a blessing, or rather, will that be a curse?
When it comes to information conduit, like what you said, I think we should not ignore 3 very important people. Person number 1, President Moon Jae-in. Great patience in passing on messages from a North Korean leader to Tokyo, to Washington, D.C., highly coordinated in the way he disseminates information. 2, we should not rule out the importance of Ms. Kim Yo-jong. Kim Yo-jong went to Pyeongchang Olympics, passed her brother's messages to President Moon, and she was instrumental in fixing the second Inter-Korean summit when the Singapore summit collapsed or was cancelled the first time. So I think these people did very well in passing information that was crucial for making this summit possible, and certainly a lot of these accurate information passed on to Mr. Trump himself. That led him to his decision-making process. Now, the final person I have to say one should be giving credit to would be Secretary Mike Pompeo. Do not forget that he was the former director of CIA. The primary business of Central Intelligence Agency is collecting information. And he clearly said yesterday he clearly said 2 days ago that the information that he provides will be very useful for Mr. Trump to make his own decision, because he's responsible for picking up the collective voices of different people to present to Mr. Trump. He's the boss, he makes the final decision.
Those are the personalities, but what about future leadership in terms of the DPRK, or rather the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue? Now we have a document, but that would be only part of those many documents needed for the future, I guess. So the question is, who's going to be sitting in that driver's seat in terms of driving the whole process forward? Will that be Donald Trump? Will that be Kim Jong-un? Will that be Moon Jae-in? Or will that be some unsung heroes, in fact, in the background? What do you think, Mr. Tan?
I think certainly the main players are not just President Trump and Chairman Kim. I think if you're talking about peace on the Korean Peninsula, then I think you need to take into account the other stakeholders, right? The Japanese, the Chinese, as well as the South Koreans. So I think these are key players, and I think what we have seen, that's made the summit, at least President Trump and Chairman Kim are concerned, a huge success. Is that I think all these leaders driven by the same purpose, right? They want to ensure that peace will prevail in the Korean Peninsula. I think all of them want to focus on economic development, and the need for there to be peace in the region becomes very important. And of course, I think China is showing its hand. I think we cannot deny, although very little has been said, but I think China has played a very big role. And I think the success, of this agreement will very much depend on all these players, working together.
Well, it's a very diplomatic way of saying it, but there has to be someone or someones in the driver's seat in order to make things happen. So, who do you think? Which country do you think? What key players do you think will be there, Mr. Lim?
When it comes to economic incentives, definitely the U.S. Secretary Pompeo has mentioned they can bring North Korea's economic capacity to the same level as South Korea. And in President Trump's press conference 2 days ago, he mentioned specifically that he would rope in Tokyo and Seoul to help as well. So in terms of economic incentive, it will be President Trump, but in terms of willpower and the ability to sort of persuade his own people to go along with the reforms that follows, or the disarmament of nuclear devices, it would be Chairman Kim.
So it seems that different roles, different tasks, and different drivers, different responsibilities. For now, I want to thank both of you, Lim Tan-Wai and Eugene Tan. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us throughout these days of coverage of the DPRK-US Summit. Really appreciate it. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. You are watching World Insight Special, coming to you from Singapore. I'm Tian Wei. For more on the DPRK Summit and the analysis following up, we'll be back after this.
Still to come on our program, with the signing of the joint statement between President Trump and Chairman Kim, we explore the possible outcomes of the deal. Could the DPRK really open up, or is this just another false dawn?
The world is changing fast, taking all our lives with it. But we can change it too, by seeking answers to problems through discussions and debates. On World Insight, I ask direct questions to real people in the know, seek genuine answers, but respect diverse perspectives. Our live global debates tackle the most critical issues head-on. World Insight with Tian Wei go beyond the headlines.
am sitting here in the temporary studio of CGTN with the background of the skyline of Singapore. The dramatic summit between the DPRK and the U.S. leader successfully wrapped up. But for those journalists like us who have been covering the earlier 6 rounds of the 6-party talks, what has been achieved in that joint statement, particularly in regarding to the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue, is not necessarily new. For example, the complete denuclearization. Well, that word has been heard for many years and probably not as impressive as complete, verifiable, irreversible, the set of phrases that have been used in the earlier statements of the 6-party talks. Those were already the achievements of earlier years. Meanwhile, when you see that there is a step-by-step process of denuclearization that both sides seem to have already committed, that is nothing new either. The 6-party talks earlier have already drawn up some plans and roadmaps, and parties already trying to improve and implement, and yet it did not get done. Having said that, though, there are a lot of things that are encouraging. One of those is the bilateral relations between the DPRK and the United States. In their joint statements, the two sides have been talking about new relations between DPRK and the United States. A new relationship, a more stable relationship, certainly could create the foundation for all sides to work on the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue. On the other hand, the peace regime for the Korean Peninsula, which has been clearly put on into the joint statement, probably is even more significant. It shows at the end of the day, after more than 20 years' effort, it is not just about the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, that task alone, but rather how to include that into the overall picture of creating peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, and therefore in Northeast Asia is the and probably much bigger subject that the whole world has to handle. Having said that, though, even though there are a lot of encouraging signs, a lot of things still remain unclear. For example, will there be enough trust? For example, will both sides, DPRK and the United States, implement what they have promised? Earlier signs of 6-party talks did not provide us with much positive answers for both of these questions. But you know what? This is a beautiful day in Singapore. Why don't we just celebrate at least a little bit, and we'll see how different sides interact. The news have come that the Secretary of State Pompeo of the United States is visiting China, going to interact with his Chinese colleagues. It is also clear that U.S. President Donald Trump has already been interacting on the phone with his colleagues in the region. So things hopefully will be getting better, but certainly on a very gradual basis. I'm Tian Wei saying goodbye from Singapore. See you in Beijing. One of the world's biggest diplomatic deadlocks, security flashpoints, and humanitarian crisis. It takes everyone's hard work, beginning with real efforts from these two. The Kim-Trump summit, a pivotal moment, and a possible game changer. Catch our special program from Singapore, the DPRK-US summit, only on World Insight with Tian Wei. Welcome back. You're still watching our special program coming to you from Singapore, our World Insight special on the DPRK-US Summit. We have arranged a panel of scholars to share with us the latest analysis in Beijing. Victor Gao Zhikai, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization. In Medford, we have Sun-Young Lee, a Kim Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School of Tufts University. In Los Angeles, Jonathan Pollack, non-resident senior fellow in the Center for East Asia Policy Studies from the Brookings Institution. Gentlemen, I want to have my warmest welcome to all of you who have been working on this issue for a long time. Professor Lee, your biggest takeaway, are we really seeing the light at the end of the tunnel?
Oh yes, there's light at the end of the tunnel for Kim Jong-un. It was a resounding success, a monumental achievement for Kim Jong-un, because he came away from this dramatic, optically gripping summit meeting with the U.S. president with far greater substantive gains, political and economic gains, than Trump. President Trump will argue that he has perhaps even tamed the North Korean dictator, that he has diffused a tense standoff, and now the two countries are getting along, and that Chairman Kim has pledged to him personally, repeatedly, with great sincerity, that he is serious this time and will effect the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But I must say that the last time we've seen this kind of dramatic outreach by the formerly antisocial North Korean leader, that was back in 2000, when the father, Kim Jong-il, paid his first visit to China in May, and then met with the South Korean president in June, and then received Vladimir Putin, the first ever visit by the top Russian or Soviet leader ever to North Korea in July, then sent a special envoy to Bill Clinton in October and received Madeleine Albright. Great dividends, great things occurred for North Korea. North Korea came across as a reasonable country. The formerly antisocial, provocative dictator came across as a trustworthy global statesman with whom the U.S. could do nuclear business, and a lot of aid kept pouring in. So I think Kim Jong-un has reset the table dramatically.
Reset the table. Is that the story repeated? Mr. Pollack, your thought here?
I agree very, very much with Professor Lee. The outcome here, frankly, was, to me, somewhat stunning, and that's not in a favorable light. It seems to me that Kim Jong-un returns home much happier for what happened. He's been legitimated by the President of the United States as a leader. He has sat across the table or next to him as an equal, and he held his own in that context. He has heard President Trump unilaterally in his press conference basically convey that President Trump will suspend U.S. military exercises, and he opened the door to reductions in U.S. military personnel because he thinks it costs the United States too much. So Kim didn't even have to ask for that. And as for sanctions, which I believe is the other core goal, sanctions relief, Trump may say he's not going to yield ground on the sanctions, but very frankly, the entire tone and tenor of this meeting gives an enormous green light both to the Republic of Korea and I believe also to China, and in a different way to Russia, to really begin to step back from this campaign of pressure on North Korea, ease that economic pressure, which very frankly I think cumulatively was one of the reasons, or a primary reason, why Kim actually was prepared to go to Singapore in the first place. So Kim walks away, I think, very, very clearly in a much stronger position than when he arrived in Singapore, even though President Trump has described this as some kind of big success.
Mr. Pollack,
I'm
you
very
and Professor
skeptical.
Lee are very skeptical about the DPRK leader, but the question that needs to be fairly asked, that some would say, what is wrong with Mr. Kim going back home with his proportion of the achievements? Everybody coming into a negotiation trying to expect some proportion of achievements, and President Trump certainly has got his own as well. So why there's anything wrong with Mr. Kim trying to achieve what he wants to achieve if eventually that deal is a good one for both sides?
In any number of areas where, among others, Secretary of State Pompeo had indicated before the two leaders met that there was going to be a much tougher stance by the United States. It's totally absent from the communique. Look, I think, frankly, the one positive outcome here is that war seems now to be off the table. I think that that's a good thing. I think a lot of the language that was used and a lot of actions that were taken by both sides over the last year or more were very, very destructive and harmful. But I don't think there could be any illusions about where or how Kim Jong-un conceives of his situation. He has expanded his horizons. He's got options. There are a lot of people I know who really believe that he's going to build on this and be a very, very different kind of leader. But I must say, I would have looked for more clear signs other than these very formulaic words in the statement to lend more confidence to my assessment.
But what about Dr. Gao in Beijing? From your perspective, this is a moment of celebration, should be, or this is a moment of rather very sober thinking?
Well, today's summit meeting in Singapore is indeed a landmark event. So for today, let us keep the best faith and let's hope for the best. And let us really hope that President Donald Trump and the U.S. government and Chairman Kim and the DPRK government can work together, leading towards eventually the denuclearization and greater peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Having said that, I would say the vagueness and the ambiguity of the communique and the lack of detail and substance in the communique really does not bode well for the challenges that may arise in the future. I would say if the litmus test of the whole exercise is denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, we do not know how denuclearization can be achieved today after the summit meeting as before the summit meeting. And if we, for example, come up with a guesstimation as to how long it may take, it may not be surprising if denuclearization will not be achieved even after President Donald Trump leaves the office, whether it is 1 term or 2 terms. The time consumed may be very long and very protracted. So I think for that particular matter, we need to be very pragmatic and realistic, and we need to be sober in our assessment of the challenges going ahead.
Okay, if we are sober about the challenges ahead, what would be the very first challenge that all sides should work on? And pragmatically, they will be able to solve it, because we have to build from the easiest one up so that there can be enough confidence building. There can also be a lot of toolboxes to be used. Mr. Lee.
If I may predict the future, this is what's going to happen. Kim Jong-un will meet with President Putin. Putin's invited him to Russia in September. That's going to happen. Kim Jong-un in the next few months will meet with Prime Minister Abe, and he will increasingly come across as a legitimate, trustworthy global leader. Kim Jong-un may even speak at the UN General Assembly, and can you imagine the splash, the sensational reaction if Kim were to come to the U.S., to New York City, and speak at the UN would cause. You saw how Kim Jong-un, just by taking a late-night stroll throughout Singapore, how warmly he was greeted, you know, loud cheers and people saying, "I love you," and so forth. Multiply that by, about 1 million if Kim were to come to New York. But if I may just offer one more analogy. In January 2001, Kim Jong-il visited China once again to Guangdong province, to the special economic zone, and of course that was an attempt to relive the southern tour, so-called, by Deng Xiaoping in 1992, which back then was a reaffirmation of Deng's policy of reform and opening, and I know Dr. Pollock and others remember. It was hailed, Kim Jong-il's trip in 2001 was hailed as the arrival of a new Deng, a Korean Deng, a reform-minded North Korean leader. Kim Jong-un will do that. So my point here is Kim Jong-un will continue to be accepted as a legitimate leader who's going to take his nation toward a more constructive path of denuclearization and reform. And in the meantime, he will have bought time and money with which to do what he really desires, which is to further continue to develop, advance his nuclear and missile capabilities.
It seems that 2 of you, at least out of 3, are very skeptical about DPRK, their capability of implementing what they have promised in the bilateral document. But one would say, fairly speaking, the same scrutiny should also apply to the United States, whether Washington has been implementing what its promise had been. So what about that, Dr. Polak?
And what's kind of ironic here is that the one thing that President Trump had managed to do over the last 18 months was to build a coalition, including China, I might note, to really put pressure on North Korea for its actions. Now he's reversed course in ways that are really quite stunning, almost as if the last 18 months didn't happen. So you're correct in that over time, American policy has often been very, very inconsistent. But if I'm trying to put myself in Kim Jong-un's shoes right now, the fact that he will take advantage of these circumstances shouldn't surprise us. Like any leader, he has to grasp at opportunities wherever he can get them. And if at this point the United States has embarked on a new direction yet again, it does, on the one hand, give Kim opportunities. On the other hand, it also means that Kim probably has to do much less to accommodate to the United States. I mean, as Dr. Gao noted before, this is going to be an incredibly protracted process. The United States government, from administration to administration or within administrations, is not exactly noted for consistency. I think Kim understands that. He's playing for time here because time is to his advantage. It's Trump right now who needs something much more tangible.
Well, not too much magical thinking, but at the same time, maybe not too pessimistic either. Dr. Gao, has the other two guests too pessimistic according to your standard?
No, I don't think so. I think they are being realistic. I think you asked the question about the United States. I don't think the United States has a good track record of keeping its promises in recent years. Look at what happened to Iraq, what happened to Libya, what happened to Syria, and look at the fact that the United States under President Donald Trump walked out of the Iran nuclear deal at the time when President Donald Trump really wanted to hold out the olive branch and to entice Mr. Kim of DPRK to walk into this denuclearization deal.
Right.
I think if you put yourself into the shoe of President Kim of DPRK, he must have thought very carefully about all these dangerous precedents, and he does not want to fall into the trap again. Therefore, I think the United States really need to redouble its efforts to convince DPRK that this time it is serious. This time it means business. This time whatever it promises will not be retracted. And the commitments made by both DPRK and the United States will be kept. Otherwise, I think the denuclearization will remain a pipe dream.
There is one crucial question that we haven't asked, that is, what about this deal? I mean, gentlemen, take a look at this deal. I mean, three things about DPRK and the United States directly, peace regime, bilateral relations, POW, MIA things, and the other thing is about how to deal with the future nuclear challenges, complete denuclearization. But you think about all of these things. This is the idea long existing. So actually, we are not seeing anything new, are we? Mr. Polak.
Yes. Tianwei, we are seeing one thing that is different, and this really does reflect President Trump. In essence, he is presenting to Kim Jong-un an alternative vision of what North Korea's future would look like, or at least how Donald Trump would envisage that future. High-rise buildings, golf courses, McDonald's franchises. That's the way Trump conceives of this. And in essence, he's trying to say to Kim, that can be your future too. The question is whether Kim has the confidence, the certainty that that's not far too big a risk to his own interests. Because what North Korea has done for decades after decades is to keep the outside world out, including China, to the degree that has been practicable for them. So is Kim really ready for this kind of a roll of the dice? On that, you know, if you can kind of control and contain the superficial manifestations of a more modern North Korea, maybe he can really hold on to that power. But very frankly, Trump has said, I'll give him security assurances, but security assurances are more than military security.
Okay.
In effect, Trump is saying, I'm going to give you job security, but no leader can give another leader job security.
We are not here to do a competition of who has the cleanest slate of history record. The thing is, how can we get things moving and moving in the right direction for everyone's benefit for the future? So Professor Lee, tell me, what would be the way that parties could work together, if there is a way?
You know, Hugo Chavez, speaking at the UN General Assembly many years ago, said, I smell sulfur, because George W. Bush had spoken at the podium before him, speaking of the devil. Where are the details for the devil to take delight in this joint statement? It's such a watered-down, basic joint statement, the most concise, details-free joint statement concerning the U.S. and the DPRK ever. Unlike previous statements, there is no mention of uranium enrichment, plutonium processing, IAEA monitors and inspection, full-scope safeguards. There's no mention of that. And even with respect to the crux of the matter, denuclearization, the expression is complete. No mention of verifiable or irreversible. So it is really just the bare bone structure of a joint statement, and I think this is, yes, just the first step, and there'll be many more acts to come, many more stages of dialogue and negotiations.
Right.
But I think the prospects for now are very good for North Korea. So it's a glorious day for Kim Jong-un.
Well, Dr. Gao, from your perspective, after all of this fanfare, beautiful wording, wonderful handshake, and that splendid working lunch, are we actually going back to where we were at the very start of the six-party talks, and has to come once again to where we have been and work every step by the way in order to get to where we had already been to and yet failed?
Well, if we compare the situation today compared with before the summit meeting, then one thing hopefully is clear. That is, today and hopefully in the coming months and years, there will be less of a prospect of a war on the Korean Peninsula than before. Keep in mind, just about 6 months ago, Korea was on the brink of war, and President Donald Trump was talking about fire and fury and complete annihilation of DPRK, and he was talking about he has a bigger button, for example. Hopefully he will no longer use those terms. He will no longer be a warmonger for the Korean Peninsula. That in itself is definitely an improvement, and I personally believe the road forward will be very arduous. It may involve different turns.
Gao Zhikai, Jonathan Pollack, and Sun Yong Lee. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. And that is all the time we have for today for our special coverage coming from Singapore, our very last edition on the DPRK-US Summit. If you would like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team here in Singapore and back in Beijing, thanks so much for watching, and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. We're going to say goodbye to Singapore and hello to Beijing tomorrow. Bye for now.